Call to order. Call the meeting to order. Let's have a roll. Woo!
It's loud tonight.
Let's have a roll call. Wow.
All
Wake
right.
everybody up.
Now that we're all awake, yes. Councilmember Kelly? Are you here?
Yes.
Councilmember Miller?
Here.
Councilmember Perkins?
Here.
Councilmember Mendoza?
Here.
Yeah, it is, huh? Councilmember Best?
Here.
Vice Mayor Turner? And
I'm
Mayor
here.
Croft?
I'm here.
Okay.
Let's go to item 2, presentation discussion regarding community outreach to local news media, Department of Commerce, and other outlets regarding the town's plan to improve the appearance of commercial properties, comply with local ordinance, and encourage ongoing commercial development, primarily along State Route 89. Mr. Sanks.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Thank you. This is really kind of an informational session on our progress so far with our second code compliance officer, Erin, that we've hired. We snatched her away from the court system and brought her over to development services, and she's been doing a really wonderful job with Joanne. And as you recall, this position had been authorized at the discretion of council for the purpose of trying to work on improving particularly the appearance of commercial properties along Highway 89. And that's in fact exactly what she's been working on. What we've also been doing too is trying to work in a collaborative manner with our businesses. We don't want them to feel like, we're trying to bring the hammer down, the town's coming after them, trying to make business more difficult for them. So she's been working with myself, with Joanne and the business community to kind of help encourage them to clean things up. You may have noticed the pet club, they had like outdoor storage out front, that's now gone. We're trying to get people to keep their inventory of goods and services inside where it belongs, as well as kind of crack down on the amount of, I wouldn't call it illegal signage, but ancillary signage that doesn't really belong there. So we've been working on that. I've got a brief PowerPoint here, and I kind of wanted to just kind of get the temperature of the council on how, I've worked with Cecilia on this, how we're going to reach out to the community, get the word out there. Word's already kind of out on the street that Erin, our new compliance officer's, hitting the pavement. But we've got some items that I've got pending that I wanted to talk to you about at first. We're going to do a short interview with myself, the new compliance officer, and Joanne with the ChinoValley review with Jason. We kind of tentatively have that scheduled, but I wanted to talk to you tonight. I don't want something going out in the paper that you're not already aware of. So we're going to probably be doing that. The Chamber's going to help us with some outreach with the business community. Matt Santos, our PIO, is going to do a brief kind of interview, and we're going to post something on the town's website. But if you had any other ideas about how to get the word out there that, we're working with the community in a collaborative manner. I don't want them to feel like again, that we're coming down on them. The idea is that if we clean up the 89 a little bit, we get everybody kind of playing fair with one another. We don't have people putting illegal signs out or other things. There's a number of things that we're trying to clean up that will encourage economic development. So just want to give you an update on that. So the focus lately has been on outdoor storage, signage, screening of outdoor items. We've been focusing as well on Friday and Saturday inspections. So Joanne's been out during our normal days off with our inspector to catch some of the people that do those little pop-up tents on the side, intersections where they're selling stuff that they really shouldn't be. Erin Deskins, like I said, she's come on over as a full-time 1-year temporary employee. And we've also been continuing to work with our legal counsel and changing from a citation process that would go to an administrative process with a hearing officer, rather than have things get logged up in the courts, which can take months and months. So that's kind of our update. I think, Joanne, if you want to briefly just talk about what you and Erin have been up to in terms of how you've interacted with the business community along the 89.
Good evening, Mayor, Council. Just a small update. Erin, if you haven't met her, she is the best code compliance officer that I have worked with. And I have worked with several. She's got the mannerism. She's the knowledge of the court system. She's a very calm, happy, nice person, and I think she represents the town very well. I've been working with her on Fridays for the last couple of months, going to the different businesses along Highway 89. Not meeting directly with the business owners except for the signage, explaining to them that the signage in the ADOT's right-of-way is not prohibited. However, we cannot enforce them to take it down. However, we have been giving them the right information on who to contact, how to get a legal permit through ADOT. We also have been asking them to come in and apply for their temporary signage. Our code is really kind of hard at this time to enforce with these temporary banner signs. It needs to be updated. However, we're doing the best we can. Most of them are taking it very well. Some of them don't understand why we even have a code for signage. Being a small business, they want to know, why we should dictate how many signs they should have to advertise their business. That's something that we really need to work on and adjust that sign code. We don't want to run these businesses out of town, and we have explained that to them. A lot, like I said, 99% of them have worked with us. 1%, I'm sure you heard last council meeting. We have been doing a lot of research along the north end of Highway 89, looking at mostly contractors' yards, the screening fencing, looking at different businesses, making sure they have the right business license for the activity, for the zoning, and we have found several cases that now we need to get an administrative call. We got to have Jason tell us how he wants to handle this. We need to be consistent. Some of them is not going to be easy to get them to comply with. A lot of the contractors' yards that we have found have been in business for many years, and it is what it is. We are not going to make them change. We need to bring this awareness to the community because we are going to be allowing some contractors' yards to do one thing, other contractors' yards to do another. But it depends on when they got their license, when they came, became that business in the zone. We have several businesses we found that did not have licenses. We found parcels that are zoned incorrectly for their business licenses. And now we are at that step to where we need to notify these businesses based on what our findings are. So this is the beginning of a long time. I mean, we have been working, I don't know, probably 6 weeks, and we're not even a half a mile from the north end of town. So this is gonna, it takes a lot of research because we gotta, research every business license, every parcel, every owner, and so we're doing what we can. If you have any questions that I can answer for you.
May I?
Sure.
Thank you for being here. In your opinion, what needs to be changed in the sign code?
The entire sign code.
We just did that.
Just to be honest, mostly the temporary signage.
Okay.
There's no real definition how long a temporary sign. It says 6 months, but does it say that they can come back after 6 months and reapply? No, it doesn't. Does it say that it's $5 for temporary sign per sign, or is it $5 for temporary sign per parcel? It doesn't say that either. It's very vague. The signage, you have to put 6 feet behind your property line, where most of the property lines are right on their pavement. So if you go 6 feet behind, their banners are in the parking lot. That doesn't make any sense. So we have to adjust and figure out a way to get their signage up.
One other question is, why are some of the businesses exempt? I understand they've been here a long time, but why would they be exempt
The code
with the
back,
new sign code?
for the sign code, there wouldn't be exempt.
I'm sorry, no.
The contractors' yards, because back then, the code says that they only have to be fenced if they surrounded by a residential property. Now it says they have to be fenced with a screening fence. Back then, they didn't have to. They just had to have a
Councilmember.
fence.
I think what she's trying to say, some of them, if that's the ordinance that was involved when you were,
Correct.
They're
okay.
grandfathered.
Okay.
Yeah,
Right.
Are
I
we
hate to
gonna
use that
someplace
grandfather.
have a standard code rather than having different people with different?
We need to standardize it.
We need a standard code, and if we've got people on 3 or 4 different, there's gonna be a real
We
issue.
need to standardize it, and that's a good point, Mayor, because what's gonna happen is, like you said, we've got half the town on one code, the other half on the other code, and they're not gonna take it very nice. They're favoritism. I mean, it's already being
So
said.
somewhere we have to start and work toward that. May take a year, may take 2 years.
Oh, it's gonna
to
take
where
a while.
Take a while. So we've got that standard somewhere that we work toward, everybody.
Right, and you know, we can, come up with the standardism. You also too, when people sell their property, new businesses come in, at that time, we can start changing it up at that time. We've
Well,
never looked at it
But
at
that
that.
could be many years.
Correct, and some of them have changed over hands, and we've not dealt with that, and we just allowed it to go on and on and on. So we need to put some rules and policies in place, so
Yeah.
when this happens, we catch it during business licensing.
But is there a way to even transition into, if you're under the old code and transition you
the
into
new
some of
code.
the new?
We could do that,
I
yes.
think that's kind
Yeah,
of what you're
that's pretty much
Absolutely.
what I'd see. And sign code, are we gonna change that and go back?
I'd like,
Tom's printing,
come on up.
Tom's printing sign will be up here saying, Tom will be up here, because he's the guy that sells all the
The banners,
banners,
the flag
so,
signs.
don't let him push you around.
I just have one quick follow-up, gentlemen. Is it possible to enforce the code when the businesses come in if their overlay is up for renewal?
Yes.
Can we do it at that point?
We are doing that now.
Okay.
What the problem is when these businesses have been in business for several years, and when it becomes renewal time, we just renew their license. We don't research
Mhm.
every license that comes through. That's what Aaron and I are doing now. We're going through each individual license and catching it. That's the only way we can do it at this point.
I've been on
Tough
town
task.
council 8 years, and the sign ordinance has been a pain in the rear for 8 years. We need to some way get that thing fixed and pretty soon.
I agree, Mayor.
I worked on it for 2.
I've been getting calls, I didn't realize that was going on, too loud,
No,
that
hope you're not getting bad
about
calls.
businesses that have been here 15, 20 years, and this particular gentleman owns a fair amount of property at the north end of town, and their automotive repairs. I haven't seen the citation, he just got a hold of me, but they've got the fence with the slats in it, out of sight, or seemingly, but only from certain view can you see the cars that are in those areas, and he's got 3 to 5, maybe 6 buildings up at the north end there. So I probably want to see his citation or refer him to somebody.
Yeah, I'm not sure what business you're speaking with. We haven't given
The
too many-
powdered blue buildings up at the north end, that's Bob Parsons. He owns a bunch of those buildings, and I think that may be one of them, but I know we'd gone commercial light. They've always had vehicles stored in there behind the fence with the slats in it, and he got, now whether he told me the exact thing, you know how that is.
He probably got a warning letter. I don't think we've done any citations.
Okay, because I didn't know, and he grabbed me, and I'll look into it.
Yeah, if you could
Just
give
happened to be
me
talking about it tonight.
The business name and the address, and I'll look into it and I'll get back with you.
He's up there by where Corey's, the yard up there.
I believe that one that you're talking about is a good example of what we need to start doing. And that was, if it's the one I'm thinking of, there was a business operating on his property that was not working with the proper zoning
Oh.
that he needed to.
Is that the
So
Toro?
therefore, they went through the process.
They did.
And this was caught due to the to doing the background check on a business license. It said you are operating this type of business in this neighborhood, you can't do that. So they went through the whole process, they rezoned so that that business is now operating legally.
That is correct.
I think that process is what we need to focus on the most. Signs, to me, I really don't give a hoot about signs
It wasn't
right
about
now.
signs, it was about, you know, and I
Storage.
didn't see the citation or the warning, you know, he caught me flat-footed and I just said, I'll find out.
Okay. I really don't give a hoot about signs right now. I think focusing on signs and is a, so far down the list of my importance, you know. And this is me, and I'm one of 7 of you. When I
My
see-
importance, it's higher.
Uh,
It's higher on my importance.
Well, I think when we talk about, you said we want our business to encourage other businesses to come in. I would just like to get them to the point that they don't discourage businesses from coming in. And when you look at some of these dumps in this town, and their sign, a flag is not gonna discourage someone from coming here. So that's why I say the signs are extremely low to me. And we know where these dumps are. We know that we need to get a handle on it.
Correct.
Now, I do suggest that doing that business license, when every business comes up for its renewal, then this code enforcement officer, now that we have, to hell with the signs and the flags, get out there and let's start matching up uses with business licenses. I think that would be, and when they come on that property, find out when that business went in. I don't think there's near as many that are legal non-conforming as what you're kind of implying here.
Well, the ones that we have, there are more legal non-conforming than what we haven't found. The problem is looking at them at renewal time. We renew all business license at the same time. So for her to go do 500,
And
that's
I-
why we're doing it individually now. Her and I are going out and we have maps and we're checking each individual building. Some of them, like I said, don't even have a business license. So we're gonna have to do it one at a time.
May I ask a question?
So,
Go ahead, I'm sorry. Go
so
ahead.
can that be altered? Can we change that? Let's put it back to, you know, adjusting instead of all business licenses at one time.
Should be doing on their anniversary when they apply.
Let's start doing it as they
I think we
apply.
talked about that.
So
at
that
one
we
time.
can then get a cycle.
Well, I guess one of the things, is there a way to transition even a legal non-conforming to a conforming status?
Yes,
I mean, we've done that with zoning things when we've known they're out of zoning.
Yes,
that we've tried
we
to.
just need to come up with that standard.
Okay. I don't know that the business, I think that's kind of ends up being a lot of busy work, but I think that you guys should look at that and maybe bring back talk to me about it as far as a recommendation on staff level, if that would work. But it may end up at least getting your eyes on each and every one of them as opposed to just this, 900 at a time.
Correct. It's a lot at one time.
So where should I send this guy? Or I haven't read the citation yet. He was saying it because you could see some of the cars in the yard over the fence from 1 or 2 points. Now, I'm sure that's not the real
Well,
truth.
it might be the one that has his business license and his activity are not one and the same.
I wouldn't doubt that
So-
with this gentleman.
It's probably one of them on our list that we're working with Jason on how he wants to handle this type of.
What is the citation process?
Citation process,
Lon's next.
Oh. Citation process is, we send out, we get a complaint, we take 3 days to go out and take a look at it, up to 3 days. If it's in violation, we send them a letter. They have 15 days to comply. They do not comply within that time, the second citation goes out, then it is another 2 weeks. If they do not
Now, are
comply,
these citations,
these are
tell me what these are.
they're not citations, they're notice of violation, notice, they could be in violation.
They're not a citation.
They're not a citation. They go to first notice, they get a second notice, and then the third notice is a violation. Then that violation goes to the courts. They have 30 days to comply, If they do not, they are fined.
Okay, it goes to the court. Does the judge then give them that 30-day?
The
To
courts
comply?
give them that 30 days.
Okay,
And then if they do not comply by their hearing date, she either fines them or gives them a chance to go out. Whatever she comes up with, that is what they do. It's all out of our hands at that time.
Do they ask you, the court ask you to go back and inspect it again?
We do. We inspect it before, the day of the court hearing, and David or Aaron or myself do go to court. We are there with pictures.
Okay, first of all, I think it's real important when we go out and we talk to these people that it is explained to them that, at least in the case you're going out for now, this is nothing new. These have been in the code, they just haven't been enforced.
That is
And now we're
correct.
coming out to bring these things up, to where they should be, so that they don't think that you're hammering them with something new. They
Correct.
understand that these are existing codes that haven't been enforced, that now we're coming in to do this. Now, I'll go to the other part of it, because I am one of the best examples you've got with my business. I built my building in 1979
Correct?
and started business when everybody said, what are you doing way out there? There wasn't anything on the other side of Road 3. And so, there's a lot of things that are in the code per se, that we've got fenced in yard, landscaping, things like that. We just did that because we wanted to. But when you start talking about bringing everybody in, taking away the grandfather part of it and bringing everybody up to today's code, I think you really need to look, we all need to look at where are we going?
Right.
A sign, that's pretty easy. How far off the property line or something like that, that's pretty easy. But what about asphalt parking lots?
Correct?
And what about handicap bathrooms?
Correct.
Are you gonna go in to a person like myself that's been there for almost 40 years and say, oh, you gotta remodel your building and put in handicap bathrooms and this, that, and the other thing? You gotta come in and asphalt your parking lot. I think you're gonna get into some places where there has to be a stopping point when it comes to that, and I don't know where that is.
Well, that's true, and we gonna have to come up with a plan. We
Yeah.
need to be consistent, we need to come up with a plan. We are not going into inside of buildings. We will not be doing that type of enforcement, bringing it up to code, or having you pave. That is a whole second, maybe phase 2. What we're trying to do right now is clean up, a beautification program right now.
Okay.
And get the business licenses current and correct. Going inside and making them do things that they haven't done in the past, that might be phase 2, and that might, this is gonna take us a long time just to get the town
Phase one
cleaned up,
done,
yeah.
Okay.
And we don't even have phase 1 defined quite yet. We're just out there trying to find out what is really out there. Now, Aaron and I have a complete list of what we found, and now we need to go in and say, this is what we found, how are we gonna handle it?
Okay.
I admire you guys for what you're doing. You got a lot of work to do.
I don't envy you.
Thank you.
It's a mess.
I mean, just, look at around, we've already seen some properties come in compliance, and what a change that is. And
You bet.
and people are coming in and telling us what a great job we're doing, and we get a lot of people that, get some hate mail, but, we're doing our job, and, well, it is what it is, so.
Do you take a police officer with you when you go to somebody?
No. Sometimes we might want to, but no, most of the time, we sit in our cars, we don't even get out, because we're just,
Yeah, that's good.
doing
Mhm.
a visual site, and then a lot of research.
And mail it to them, right?
Yes.
Ms.
Just,
Perkins.
thank you. Just for clarification, in regards to overflow, because Todd came and spoke with us, were they given a warning letter ahead of time, or was it, the way it was presented is they came in and said, we can't have a flag anymore, and we've had it for 7 years. So
What-
can I have the backstory on that as far as your
Sure.
end?
what Erin has done with these temporary banners, she has personally, didn't send them a letter at first, she's walked in and said, according to code, you're in violation because of these, you have 2 days to come into the town offices and apply for a permit and get the proper signage permit, legal, and if not, then she would send them a letter. But
Okay.
her person, when she's walking in, she has given them 2 days according to code. Before she even writes a letter, makes a case or anything, she gives them 2 days to come into compliance.
Okay. Not a warm, fuzzy letter ahead of time. That's what I was curious about.
Not at that time, it's just verbal.
Okay. Thank you for all you do.
What kind of flag was that at Overflow?
What those, we have a couple of them. They're not, it's not an American flag, it's a banner flag
It's a decorative flag.
that is a
Decorative
decorative,
flag.
right? It's red, white, and blue.
I remember he came in and talked to us.
Cup of coffee.
Yeah.
I mean, you had bringing food, you had characters at homes had these flags all the time.
It applies to commercial
I know.
properties, commercial flags.
Anybody else?
No, I think what's going on is good, and it's long overdue. You're going, especially when you start talking about zoning and where people are at and what they're doing, and if they're blatantly just doing things wrong. It's just as I listened, I start thinking in my
Sure.
head where, you could get really deep with this.
Well,
Co-
you've got
yeah.
property on the front, you've got property in that area too, so.
Code compliance can go really deep. You can start with painting, their buildings, make their roofs. I mean, code compliance can go really in depth, but we're not there yet. We don't have enough officers. We don't even have the right code to enforce
I don't know what
property
I'm,
maintenance like that.
I don't know what I'm doing wrong yet, because they haven't got as far
We-
as my building. I'm further than a half a mile up the road, so
You should
I
have
don't
started
know.
at his building and
We are just staying on the 89, right? Just making sure.
89, and then the ones just kind of off 89.
Oh, okay, I'm good.
But yeah, so council, I guess we're trying to make sure we're hearing from you, what you're hearing from the community, and that we're trying to address what you guys consider to be the priorities out there. So, keep giving us feedback because we need it. It doesn't stop tonight. You're gonna keep hearing from the community, but, we need the feedback, and
Yeah.
we're trying to do what you guys want us to do and focus on those properties, so.
I believe that the legal non-conforming, like Lon's talking about, that's a legit thing. They are legal non-conforming.
They
That-
are.
I
and-
find that very cut and dry.
And it's a lot of research.
Now, if Turner Pump neglected to get a business license for 30 years and then came and got one here 10 years ago, guess what? You just finally got caught. And I know that's not the case. I'm just using,
I
An
think I
example.
got to help design the first business license.
so I'm still going back to the business license as being the key to when this code was, originally,
It is, and
put
that's
into
what we
place.
do. We go back and not only, do the research on the computer system of the county, ownership, then we go back and pull all the manual building permits, APN files, business license files, and then we have to research it to make sure it didn't have a conditional use permit, it didn't have an overlay, there's a lot of research to make sure, before we even attempt to send them a letter, we have to do this research, and then figure out what we're gonna do.
I'm again to say my priority is the trashiness of the direction the town is going. And I don't know how anybody else feels about that. Again, I don't see a flag with a coffee cup on it as looking
I would
trashy.
agree with you 100%.
So, maybe some input from the others. Where do you guys wanna focus first?
I agree.
I have a flip side scenario, just real, hang tight. I know, I'm talking a lot tonight. I was in the Hazelnook, just a little cute little store, and someone came in ranting and raving about a new code compliance officer, blah, 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 blah. And the owner of the Hazelnook said, "Oh, really?" And she pulled out a stack. Of her license, her sign permits, everything, and said, "Here you go. Nope, it's all right there." It was a member of the general public, but she was educated and had everything and said, "No, here, this is it. It says here, black and white." So there are businesses that are in compliance that know, and then there are businesses that just like to get mad. That's my 2 cents. I am 100%, I've talked to Cecilia and Jack and the mayor about cleaning up the highway in regards to beautification, in the sense that I would like people to want to stop in Chino if they
Correct.
drove through here, and not just drive through, be like, oh, there's Safeway, you know, and then keep driving. Next.
Mike?
Well, I just think we need to have a highway clean. People drive through, that is their first impression of our town. And even though we laugh about being the redneck capital
Some of us
Arizona.
don't laugh about that.
I don't laugh about that,
I
by the way.
don't wanna go ahead and have my town be a redneck town.
Thank you.
And we are working with ADOT, and it is difficult to work with ADOT, but we are working. And I also had a meeting with the Parks Department, the roads crews, depicting all the town's parcels, getting a priority and who's responsible for what parcel, to clean up our own parcels. So in-house, we are working on that also.
Mr.
Hi.
Hi.
How are you?
I'm good. How you doing?
Well, I can agree with several things going on. I agree where signage is not important. However, I also know that if you leave somebody doing a sign wrong and somebody new comes in and wants to get a sign and do the same thing and you tell them they can't, then that creates an issue. So I understand how that can be a problem. I do agree with the illegal businesses and the wrong zonings and the, that stuff, and people working without licenses at all, or given an address and then their home for their business when it's actually at another place. That's more of a headache that I can see than the signs. But I also can say, you're gonna have the people coming back and saying, well, if they can do it, why can't I? And then again, with the grandfathered, like Lonnie's talking, and other businesses that are around here, I hate to say favoritism, but I can see it saying, well, that's too bad, you should have been here in '79 also, So, that's my 10 cents.
I think it's good that the exploratory is going on, that we identify that as I think about the business, he may not have the right license, and I don't know, I'm clueless on it, but I will find out, and
And I'll follow up with Aaron. I mean, we
Yeah.
have a list, and we are not citing anybody yet because we want to be consistent. We also do not want to make these business owners.
but I think it's good to try and clean up the whole thing, and if we don't
Absolutely.
start somewhere, you don't turn the first rock over, you won't get grass.
Correct.
I want to piggyback on what Jack said real quick. I think everyone remembers the opinions the community had when we gave a certain manufacturer company a 1% tax decrease, and how the other companies were like, why? That's not fair. Why do they get it and we don't? I don't want to see ourselves in a position, the town in a position of saying, sorry, your business, you're okay because you've been here a while, but you're not because you're new. So I think that's a really fine line that we have to walk. Just my O2.
And I think there's also a fine line between compliance and enforcement.
That is
And
true.
I will give Joanne credit, since she started here, we used to have code enforcement, and she asked right away, if I'm gonna take over code, can we change it to compliance? And, obviously that has a different connotation in everybody's mind as opposed to enforcement. And I think that she has hired the right staff to try and bring you into compliance and do that friendly, as opposed to trying to whack you. But occasionally we do have to enforce, but
Correct.
we do try and bring them into compliance.
I can close with one final thing. When we originally started on the UDO rewrite, it was to help clean up the town. It was something that a couple of us had noticed, and that was the original intent. And it was to, we realized that we may need to do some rewriting in order to make the code more applicable and not contradictory
Correct.
here and there. And with that being said, even some of the things that are kind of cut and dry that are in the code. As you're out there and you and your new code enforcement, even the old code enforcement,
Code compliance.
Compliance.
notice that this really isn't enforceable. It's kind of antiquated. Those ideas can come to us. We as a council can change those.
Yes, and we are making note, we have several notes. There are several things that need to be changed out there, and I think hopefully Jason is going to correct all these, I mean, we can't be perfect, but we also cannot make the rules so hard that they don't want to do business here, and, go take their business elsewhere.
Yes.
We don't want
So as a council, we're not just up here,
Right.
doing this. We also need to help you, and you need to let us know what we can do, and more than happy.
Well,
To
hopefully
kind of
we'll come-
So diplomatic,
To kind of
Corey.
summarize, it sounds like you're doing what you should be doing.
We're
To
trying.
continue.
Thank
We
you.
know it's gonna take a while. There's a lot of work to do. And keep us informed. You have a committee, work with them. Good luck.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for what you're doing.
Mayor.
You got one more?
Yes, sir.
Hi. I think what would be the concept of a sign from a writer, we put an article in the paper that we, as the community, are trying to clean up our looks, get everyone in compliance so we're a more viable, there's a better worded person than I, but they can write an article for the paper that says that we're beginning this, and take a look at, kind of towards the business people, take a look at what your license is, or, just an open announcement to the population. We're trying to clean up, come in with the soft approach,
Absolutely. That's the word.
code
the soft
compliance,
approach.
soft, enlighten them of what we're planning on trying to do to make the town better, and then that might help.
I believe that's what Jason was referring to with the public outreach.
Correct.
I think one thing we need to do as a council is if we have those complaints, make sure it goes back to
Please,
staff.
yes.
So they can deal with them. And we need to
Absolutely.
stay out
Please
of
do.
it as much as we can.
Yep, as much feedback as possible, so we can try and keep refining the process. And Jason's been doing quarterly reports in front of the council on, building permits and all the updates, and perhaps he can keep giving you updates as well. Joanne, you mentioned today at leadership about your number of code cases. Why don't you mention that to the council as well?
We are at this point almost, last year we had probably about, to be exact, 197 cases in 1 year. We are already at 176 cases. And we're not even through the fiscal year yet. Doesn't mean that they have been cited, but they have had a violation and they've come into compliance, but we're gonna be double over than what we've had last year, so. Bringing on a new officer has helped, and she is great.
Thank you.
Any last words? Nope. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We ready for the next item? Just give me 1 second. All right. Do we need to make a motion since these are all study session items? Or do we just move forward?
I don't think we had any option for action.
Okay, great, perfect. All right.
Just didn't know if you want to read the agenda item though, somebody, so that we know what the topic is. I think that's
Let me
what you're.
go on to
I
number
would just-
3.
A little segue.
I didn't know where you were going or whether you were doing the other one. Presentation overview of the intent and purpose of conditional use permits, planned area developments, and the general development process related to rezoning cases and other entitlement applications related to new development.
Perfect. Thank you, Mayor and Council. It was brought to our attention the last few months that there was some concern about understanding what the concept of a conditional use permit might be or what a planned area development might be. We've had a lot of those come before you. And so this is more kind of a learning session, if you will, question and answer about what they are. So I've got a very brief PowerPoint. I pulled this directly from the code. You see conditional use permits quite a bit. And so what the underlying aspect of a conditional use permit is that there's a use that's allowed in a zoning district, but based on at least the council in 2006 who adopted the prior code. And then also with the sign code update, there's conditional use permits in there as well for like electronic message signs. The council wanted to have some additional discretion on those approvals. So you couldn't just do it by right, but they could take a look at it. And a conditional use permit, as I can just read here for you from the screen, can be granted only expressly by the ordinance after P&Z has made a recommendation to the council, and that you found, one, that it won't be materially detrimental to adjacent properties. So if you can imagine for a moment, the electronic message panel signs, they could be bright and flashing and be a distraction to, like, let's say, a neighboring residence. So you could have some discretion on the brightness and, when it could be lit and how late. And the second part is that it's reasonably compatible with uses in the surrounding area. And you can also designate a period of time for a conditional use permit. Sometimes we grant them without a time permit at all. And then sometimes we say, okay, we're going to see how this goes and come back in a year and we'll see if we want to reapprove it. Maybe after a year you find that there's been no problems and you grant it for 5 years, or there is no expiration date on it. And so I kind of wanted to turn it back to the council on conditional use permits. Is there any questions or concerns or about the process or the purpose that you're aware of? I know that there's a concern that we have too many of them. I've heard that a couple of times. Like, you always get the question. So go ahead, please.
I have several, so I'm sorry you have to teach me this because I don't understand it.
Okay.
A CUP, we'll stick with that because there's several different little things you can do.
Sure.
But a CUP, is it transferable? Or is it?
It's place-based, site-based. It's not transferable, council member.
So
No.
if I get a CUP and I sell to Lonnie, it doesn't go to him?
Oh, I see what you mean. Is it transferable by
With the
ownership?
property.
Right. The CUP is not typically related to ownership. It's related to a use on the property. So let's say I have a CUP to have a residence in a commercial district, and I sell that house to another person. And we've had a couple of those. It just goes with the property. It doesn't matter who owns it. Now, if you don't initiate the CUP, let's say you get a CUP for a specific type of business that requires one, but you don't start that business for over a year, then it becomes null and void based on our current code. But it stays with the property, and it's based on the use. It's not owner specific.
Okay. And then I keep hearing about CUPs expiring.
We do have a lot of expired CUPs from many years ago. There was no tracking system really put in play until we randomly found, as Joanne knows very well, business licensing sometimes triggers, a file review, a parcel review, where we find, oh my gosh, you had a CUP to operate this business in 1999. It expired in 2003, and you're still doing business.
Yeah,
And we're trying to fix that. As you know, we've been doing a lot of house cleaning. This past year, this council's been quite active in these housekeeping type items. So
don't you interrupt me.
We-
I'm not even close.
and so we bring them forward to you as quickly as we can. We're trying to fix these, zonings that, someone's operating, a manufacturing business in commercial light, and, the screening issues. We are trying to level and make the playing field fair.
I'm sorry, I got distracted. The mayor was.
I'm sorry. I want to
That's
interrupt
just
you and
not
the
true.
mayor.
Now, is it cost beneficial to do, what's the CUP or a zoning change, right? That's the two options?
Well, it really depends on what the specific use is. They actually cost the same. We kind of go through the same hoops. It's just that when you do a CUP, you need to make sure that you meet these two conditions. Certainly, when we're looking at a zone change, we're also going to look and see if there's any detrimental impacts on adjacent properties, et cetera. We vet that a little bit differently, though. Through conditional use permits, the use is actually allowed in the zoning district. But you've asked to have some more discretion over that, so we bring it back to you through a CUP process so you can determine hours of operation, lighting, smoke, glare, anything that could typically have a detrimental impact on the immediately adjacent properties. You can have a say on it. Okay. So it's a little different. It's more pointed, And it's very specific because council wanted the extra level of discretion without just saying, hey, you can just do this by right. We want you to bring it back. We want to look at it closely and make sure that, you know, you're not harming your neighbor's property.
Okay. Any difference in the obtaining time
No,
frame?
well, not really. I mean, complicated zoning cases take the longest. A CUP could be complicated, but they typically take about the same amount of time as a zoning case.
And then I have enforcement here. And you kinda changed or answered that question, sorry, a little bit, but you said after a year's time, if they don't comply to what they said they were gonna do, then it becomes null and void?
If they don't actually start what they set out to do, let's say I came in here for a CUP to get an electronic sign. We've seen these. When we'll address the sign code, I've heard the sign code mentioned several times tonight, and I don't like it either. But we're going to fix it with the code rewrite. But for example, if I got a CUP to put in an electronic sign, came to you, went to the community, came to the council, got an approval, but I didn't pull a permit, I didn't build the thing for 3 years, it actually expired. So
After 1 year?
after a year,
And then there's no expiration to your rezoning?
no.
Okay,
We don't do
now-
reversionary, you'll hear the term reversionary zoning, we don't use that term much anymore. Ever since Prop 207 passed, I think in 2006, we don't initiate rezonings to go back to the old zoning.
Okay, and now the third thing is, when we changed our, whatever it was that, about the marijuana growers,
Right.
and they came in and got a thing,
Protected development rights?
that's it. So let's talk about that one,
Okay.
with the same things, is that transferable?
I'm not aware that anything with the protected development rights are they transferable, like if I own the property and I sell the property, but it's the same property? You can't transfer protected
Like,
development.
again, if I have, I have a protected development and I sell it to Lon, does that go to him?
If
On
you're
the
doing
same
it,
property?
my understanding is that you can continue to, the protected development rights could transfer to a different owner. They can't transfer to a different property.
Okay.
Like, let's say you sold one property and bought the lot next door, you can't shift them over.
I was trying to do that.
Okay.
Okay, and then is there an expiration on those?
My understanding is that they had a 5-year expiration on them and they were passed in approximately 2014.
And cost, no cost, or for the protective development to obtain one? Is there cost
Actually,
associated?
I apologize.
I'm just trying to educate myself.
No, of course. No, typically rezonings and CUPs are $400 plus $230 advertising fees. But for the PDRs, I don't recall what we charged at the time.
Jack, you cannot get one now.
I don't want
Oh.
one.
But a person cannot get one now, so yes.
We sunsetted
I'm
them,
just
yes.
trying to understand how they work.
I don't believe there was a fee. They were required to come in within a certain amount of time and get their protected
See,
development
I don't
right
understand one
established.
from another, that's my problem.
Okay.
I can, if you'd like, we can kind of get back to basics. I'd be more than happy to explain it. So what we do here, in development services is, this is, the whole overview wasn't just CUPs. We were going to talk about planned area developments, and the overall development process. So the property throughout the town, as you know, has a specific zoning district. Every piece of property is zoned for specific use, and then it comes with development standards. If what you would like to do with that property doesn't conform with the zoning district, that it's in, you can ask for it to be rezoned.
And this is the master plan we're.
And then we look at the general plan and make
The
sure you
general
conform
plan,
with the
sure.
general plan, right? And then we look at the zoning district and does it make sense? Is it compatible with surrounding properties, et cetera? And then once you are able to obtain that zoning, or maybe you need a CUP, like we talked about, there's different mechanisms to get you to the use and development standards that you desire. And then the town makes a decision whether they're going to support that or not, and it's made by this council. Staff will make a recommendation, as you know, as we always do, and council ultimately will make a decision. So you can rezone property, you can get a conditional use permit if it's that specific, for a specific use. There's general plan amendments where you can actually change the general plan map, or text within the general plan if you need to. We have a number of different types of cases. Preliminary plats. That's a function of subdividing property. So I own a very large parcel and I want to say, you know, I want to take this one big parcel and make 100 lots out of it. I would go through the preliminary plat process. I may also need to do the zoning process with that, and you can run them concurrently. That would entitle you, let's say, for example, I have a bunch of AR5 zone property, and I want to do, like Mr. Fletcher wants to do 1 acre lots. I would ask to rezone to SR1, and then if I was in a hurry, I'd probably ask to also do a preliminary plat, which would show how I would wish to subdivide that property, where the streets go, where the lots go, where does the park space go, those sorts of things. Once I get done with all of that, which is going to take about 4 months and come in front of you a couple of times maybe, I would go through the final plat process. And that's where we get into even a deeper technical review. This is where Frank gets even more involved. And then we bring it back to you, and we get that approved, signed, and recorded over at Yavapai County. And you can start doing your improvements. You can start grading, putting in utilities, creating what we call finished lots, so you can actually build a house on them. And then that's how the building permit process ensues from there.
And so if they flip the property, what happens with that plat? It's already recorded, so they're gonna do the exact thing that's on the plat,
The
correct?
plat runs with the property. Now, if somebody decides, so let's say, you know, they get a plat recorded and they want to change it up, which we saw a lot of that stuff happen, you know, when the housing bust happened. A lot of things got approved but not built. And then people come back and they want to build something a little different. They still have to come back to you with revised plats and perhaps even rezoning cases, and et cetera.
I just don't understand what the benefit is versus rezoning versus a CUP.
It's very specific in the code. I can understand what you're saying. I'm not certain that there's a benefit to it. There are times where you could actually seek to rezone property. The case in point would be a residence in a commercial district. We've got a lot of houses on commercially zoned property along the Highway 89. Technically, they're usually legally non-conforming. It gets people into some trouble sometimes, though, when they want to sell that property or refinance that property, because with it being legally non-conforming, sometimes the lender gets confused as to what to do. So what we can do is we can write a letter saying you're legally non-conforming, or we can get you a CUP, a conditional use permit, which basically legalizes that residence on the commercial property. But if I want to run a business out of it, you may wish to just rezone it to residential if you want. I don't know really how to explain the difference, except that the CUP is very pointed for specific uses that need extra discretion.
Okay, and now, one more thing and I'll be done.
Well, no, I
And
was
then
gonna
I'll
try
shut
to
up.
answer your question.
Go ahead.
When you rezone, that's for good.
No, you can rezone and rezone and rezone.
Well, I know, but that rezoning that you get is permanent
Mhm.
to you. A CUP is not permanent.
It's not,
Right, and
that's
what's
correct.
the
So that's
benefit?
the difference.
Well, if you got a CUP to run your pump place at your, where you're at now, then every 7 years or whatever it is that it expires, you'd have to go get another one.
As
Go
long,
get another one.
as long as I'm allowed to up it that 7 years, they can deny it. It can be denied. They say, no, we don't want that here anymore.
See, again, why not zone it?
That's what I'm.
And Vice Mayor and Council Member Miller.
That's the
CUPs can also be
Yeah.
revoked if you don't comply with the conditions of the CUP, or you're not acting in the way in which it was approved for. We could actually revoke it. We can initiate a revocation of it.
Okay, one last thing and I'll shut up. You
Does
guys
it help,
have-
like the windmill house was an example of one that wanted a CUP? And staff and council wanted that as well, because there were some conditions that the neighbors wanted put on the property
Yeah.
that weren't able to be done through
I got it.
zoning.
There, that just folks.
So
Okay, I
CUP was the
understand.
best way to handle
So we have more
those.
regulation with the CUP.
You can.
Okay, gotcha.
It-
Now,
I'm not gonna muddy the water.
just for example, the marijuana facility that is on 1 West, the first one you hit going up from 3 North,
Okay.
they got a protective development plan, and they sat right here and promised us that within 1 year they would have all this done, and in 2 years they would have all this farming going on, growing hay, and then in 3 years they would do that. So, does that, being that they haven't done this, does that mean anything to their protective development?
Is that Perry's site?
Dun, dun, dun.
Did I step over my?
Oh, no, I apologize, Mayor and Councilmember Medler. I'm not exactly sure off the top of my head. With the protected development rights plan, you have a certain number of years in which to build what you said you were gonna build. You can't have one extra greenhouse than that is. You can't have one extra square foot of growing. You're like locked in. That's it. We do have,
So your building has to be done within that 5-year plan or whatever it is, you said 5 years?
you have 5
expires?
years in which to fulfill the plan that you said you were going to back in 2014.
Okay.
And I thought you had 1 year actually to present a plan.
The protected development rights plans were presented and approved at the time of their adoption. So
when
they didn't come in after. It was at the council voted on them.
when we changed the zoning requirements for a
Yep.
grow facility, they had, I believe it was 1 year to then enter into a protective development plan.
To be quite honest, off the top of my head, since I wasn't here during the time that happened, I know that it was initiated by a law firm in the valley to help protect their clients' interests, and then they worked with Phyllis, who's no longer, of course, representing the town. She's retired. My understanding was they were given a certain cutoff date in February or so. I think was it 2014, and they all came in all at the same time. And we're
Yeah,
like,
they did.
You can't submit after that. We basically sunsetted the provision for the protected development rights.
They came in with this plot plan, and it showed that they weren't gonna do the new next greenhouse until, 5 years, but they also said they were gonna do landscaping up front within the year, and then there was gonna be the hay fields. You remember all this, Lon? Because in your motion, you said that would be done, within that time. And my question is, if they said they were gonna do that, which they haven't done that, does that have any effect on their status of their development?
Well, we could be in a little bit of a legal haywire, but we would probably go through the compliance process like we would for any other business, whether it's a medical marijuana grower or it's an auto zone. If they don't install the landscaping based on when they said they were going to, then we would start citation process. Or as Joanne explained earlier, we would soft touch and then hard touch at the end if we need
Again,
to.
I'm just trying to understand. I'm not trying to say that you need to go get this guy. I'm just
Right.
trying to understand how it all.
Well, the
all
Four South,
follows.
the large facility, on Four South, they had a year to get those trees in, and they ended up putting them in the last 3 weeks, because we were on top of them about it. We said, hey guys, you're supposed to plant, 20 some odd pine trees to help kind of screen the facility. You know where I'm
Yes,
talking
yes,
about by
yes,
the
yes.
spillway. And so they did comply. So that's an example of how we used the permitting process and just, myself working with the project manager to get that done. If somebody's out of compliance that I'm not aware of, then we would initiate the process. We'd probably send them a letter or give
No,
them a call.
like I said, I was just curious if that would void the whole, because it's not really a requirement. It's
it's
just
a-
what they said they were gonna do.
It's a good question. I think legal counsel, the protected development rights are already kind of in a realm of their own. They're not commonly used. Trust me, I've worked in 30 some odd jurisdictions in 4 states, and this is the first place I've done protected development rights or dealt with it. So I'd probably have to defer to Andrew.
Thank you very much for clearing all that
Of
up
course,
for me.
I hope it cleared something up.
I'm done now. You guys can have at 'em.
About time. No. Anybody else? Questions? Yeah. No.
I've got when somebody comes in for a rezone, one of the issues I have with the way we do this is that you end up starting out with your neighborhood meeting, and you then tell your neighbors that these are my intentions of the use of this property after I get it rezoned, and it fits within the category within whatever rezone I'm going towards. And I find it a little bit disingenuous, this whole process, because in reality, once I get that rezone,
Right.
I'm not obligated to use that property for what I told my neighbors, what I told the town, nothing. So
Right.
I really don't know why we even kind of go through that part of the process, because again,
Right.
next thing you know, 6 months later, I'm still legal to put in any business that's within that zoning whether it was what I told them 6 months ago or not.
Right.
So I really don't like that implication. Now, that is where a planned area development, though, is different. If someone comes in for a planned area development and they said, this is what I want to do, well, then you got to stick with that plan,
That's correct.
correct?
That's absolutely correct. Mayor and Councilmember Mendoza, you know, whether it's you change your mind or you sell that property and it changes hands 3 times and somebody else wants to use commercial heavy zoning for a use that's different than what was initially told to the neighbors, you know, 1 month ago or 7 years ago. I think we can continue to improve the way we present things. You know, we allow applicants the opportunity to tell their story about what they want to do. Oftentimes they'll come in and say, hey, I want to do heavy trucking business, or I want to do retail, or I want to do this or that. And they tell their story, they illustrate their plan. But, you know, staff can always advise, you know, when you get commercial heavy zoning, you get everything that comes with it possibly. And there's no guarantee of what could happen tomorrow versus 10 years from now. So that's point taken. Planned area developments are more laser focused. They offer applicants the ability to diverge from base zoning district standards. You can change uses up a little bit. Development standards can change. You can maybe build a little higher or a little closer to the property line. Or maybe you actually want to do something that would otherwise not be palatable in that zoning district, so you offer a planned area development and actually make your property more restrictive to get what you really want to get done. I try not to speak about specific projects since they're not on the agenda, but I'll be talking in general. Apartment projects that have or have not been that palatable to the council or to P&Z or others, you know, they can use the planned area development overlay to prove that they're actually providing much larger setbacks than would otherwise be required, and in return to hopefully get support from the council or P&Z for the project. So that's one way to look at it that way too. So it's not just they're trying to get something for free. It's like, it's your way of locking in maybe bigger setbacks or more landscaping, more open space for neighborhoods, park spaces, amenities, etc. And planned area developments are your way of kind of opening up the box. You don't have to color in the lines like you normally would in every base zoning district. You get to do something possibly more unique. What we found, though, also what happens with planned area developments is as your codes get older, and as you know, our code needs to be rewritten, which is being done now, is when you start to kind of fall out of lockstep with what's happening in the marketplace, what's happening in development, you find your zoning districts don't make sense anymore, and they're not always written very well for current development. So people start using planned area developments all the time, which we've seen a lot of planned area developments come through in more recent years because our code doesn't really fit the box anymore. So what we're trying to do now is improve our code, improve all of our districts, so we don't have to use planned area developments to band-aid everything, if that makes sense. So the planned area development overlay, you know, it is a zoning. It is a zoning case. It's been stated in the past. There seems to be some lack of understanding, but it's a zoning action. It's adopted by ordinance, and it's a way to take the base code and kind of make it more malleable to what's or usually assumed to be unique projects or large complex projects. So I hope this has helped. I understand that we've got a lot of entitlement sort of cases and applications, and I just want to hope that the council feels comfortable with their grasp of understanding of each and every one of them. And if you don't have questions tonight, you're always welcome to, of course, reach out to me. I've done one-on-ones several times with new P&Z members, new council members, you know.
No, what the information you gave was very helpful. Thank you.
Perfect.
Any other?
I'm good.
Okay, let's go on to the next, number 4. Review and discussion regarding the proliferation of Conex-style storage containers primarily on commercial property and how these should be regulated for location and screening on properties. Discussion may also include how these containers may be adapted to structure such as offices.
Mayor, thank you again. It's the Jason Show tonight. And my least favorite subject is Connex boxes. They are the bane of our existence, yet they're very useful and they serve a purpose. So what we'd really like to get tonight is, the first discussion was really an update on code compliance, where we're going, making sure you're good with our community outreach efforts. The second item is kind of a learning session, Q&A on CUPs and entitlement type cases. And this one is wanting to get the temperature, if I may, from council on how you would like staff to proceed with, we do have a UDO update going on right now. Do we want to regulate Connex boxes? Code's kind of silent, except for medical marijuana. You can't have them on those sites. But we're not sure what to do with them. They're everywhere. And they're up and down the 89. And for those of you that aren't familiar with what a Connex box is, it's that. This is what I found online. They're about 8 feet wide, 8.5 feet tall. They can be 20 feet long, 40 feet long. They come in different sizes. They're basically cargo containers that have been repurposed. They're maybe not being used to ship cargo anymore. They're just being thrown on properties to store stuff. Then we have people that want to convert them into little offices or whatever. They want to use them as a workshop. You may know the new facilities that got built down the road. I forgot his last name, but they have they wanted to turn a Connex box into a spray booth. So we have mechanisms in place that meet building code requirements in which you can actually turn a Connex box into a building or usable space. We've talked briefly in the past. We had a feasibility meeting where we have somebody that wants to do an entire self-storage facility made out of Connex boxes. Which, I'm not even sure what that would look like. It just sounds like a bunch of boxes with doors on them. We've got places that repurpose Connex boxes as miniature apartments. But mostly what we have is we just have a bunch of facilities that have Connex boxes sitting outside. And we kind of want to get your idea of, do you think the Connex box in and of itself needs to be screened from view? Or do you think the contents are already being screened because they're inside a Connex box? Does that make sense? Do I need a fence around a fence? Do I need a fence around a box? So we're just want to know where you guys are at with that.
Ms. Perkins?
My wish is that they would be required to be painted the exact same color as the building they serve. I don't see a need to screen them in necessarily, but I would like them to be the exact same color.
It's funny, Mayor and Councilmember Perkins, I'm still getting used to saying that.
Me too, me too.
I had to look again, just real quick. We did actually ask for the Connex box that went into the new facilities. Which one?
B&M.
They asked if they could put a Connex box in, and of course I was like, can you please put it on the other side of the building from the 89 so we don't have to see it? And then I said, can you please paint it the same color as the building? So it just kind of blends in, and they did. So just so you know, as a policy, we're on top of that wherever we can. Sometimes these things just pop up. People just drag them onto their property, and we don't get involved in the process until we find out later. But we will. I'll take that as a good policy suggestion.
Yeah.
Do
we
we
can put it in
have,
the code?
do we have any restrictions on residences?
I'm not aware of a specific preclusion or something that would preclude somebody from having one on their property. They don't require technically a building permit because they're not a building.
I'm sorry, Jason, but didn't the county just recently pass an ordinance where they have to have a permit for a Connex box?
I'm not
Yep.
aware, actually.
Yep, by county?
That would be good. Actually, that would be good information. Are you aware of it? But we're doing land use permits, aren't we now? Or are we still doing? Less than 200 Right, okay. And so an 8 by 24 is getting close, so.
I paid for a permit to have mine here, so I know that there is such a permit.
We've been talking about whether we should require building permits for storage containers, and whether we should change that over to what's called a land use permit, which is a different type of process. It just helps us regulate where they're at and where they're located. But since they're not buildings,
I look at these as a storage container.
right,
They're acceptable.
they're portable.
Now, how many do you allow?
And how high?
Yeah, that one can be, can be
37 and a half.
That's
That would be
exactly
the
what we would
discussion.
love to hear from the council, if you don't mind, is like, I don't want to act and turn against the tide of the community and what they need, what businesses need. A lot of you have businesses that could use these types of containers. Some of you have them yourself. We would like to know what a reasonable direction would be to go in as we consider regulations for something that we don't really regulate right now.
I don't think that we're really equipped to answer some of the questions as far as using them for anything other than a storage container.
Right.
I think we would need to get input from the building department, from the fire department, just how far, I think we need more professionals saying whether someone can turn one of those into a shop or an office.
And
Yeah,
Councilmember
I don't
Mendoza,
think
we
so
actually have
At this point.
the outlines for that. Like if there's very specific guidelines on how you turn a cargo container into an office. A lot of those, they have to be treated because there's lots of pesticides and other things that are inside them. They're quite toxic if they've been used for trans-Pacific or transatlantic shipping, to keep vermin and things from festering in there. So once they get here and they become kind of stationary on the property, they have to be redone. If they're to be turned into a building, there's a whole bunch of codes they got to go through to get that done too. So I guess there's really two conversations. One is, if they're just being used for storage, how would you like them addressed? If you have an opinion, and again, it doesn't have to be decided tonight. What I wanted to do is initiate the conversation about them, because we get a lot of complaints, we get a lot of interest.
Let's start on this side.
My thing, fences are ugly. Connex boxes are not pretty. I have some, I'm not gonna lie. They're not pretty, but if they're painted the exact same color as the building that they serve, I don't have a problem with them. I think if we want to implement that they have to be fenced in, then not only do we have a Connex box, but then we have an ugly fence around the Connex box.
Right.
So the property itself could look better overall. If it was just painted the same color, it would blend in and not have a tacky fence around it.
Plus the Connex's box are 8 feet tall and the fence is only 5.
Or
So-
6, right? And then you want green and white slats? Like,
Yeah.
I mean,
You really,
that would be my preference, is that it be painted the exact same color as the building it
Okay.
serves. Why are you laughing?
I'm good with that.
Okay.
Court?
Next.
No, I'm good.
I will agree with Annie. They come in all different colors, and I think it's atrocious to have all these boxes of many colors and many companies who shipped in them,
Sure.
We need to go ahead and make them appearance presentable, not just throw them on the property and let them sit, and you got a green one, a red one, or a yellow one, an orange one,
And Councilmember Best, sometimes they're not always in the best condition either. Sometimes they're
he
banged
just don't
up
like
and
them,
dented
refuse
and.
to load 'em.
My preference is, if you're gonna put them out on 89 or someplace, make sure they're hidden somewhere off, not out in front of a building, or, because they look terrible.
So Mayor, if I may, particularly along the 89 corridor, of course, that's the vast majority of our
Yeah.
commercial zone property. The preference would be that they be located behind a permanent structure, but still be allowed, and then painted to match the building, kind of like what we've just done.
Right.
So I think we're going on the right path. We just want to make sure, again, planners can be, a little onerous sometimes. So I want to make sure that we don't
We're trying to clean up.
punish anybody.
We're trying to clean up, and if we put a bunch of multicolored
Shipping containers.
shipping containers out there, it's
Rusted.
gonna look.
The burnt orange is very pretty.
It looked great on that cargo ship 10 years ago.
My feeling is they really do serve a purpose
Yes.
for storage. I think if a person's got a 2,000, 3,000 square foot building, shop, office, so on and so forth, and they have a couple of Connex boxes for on-site storage for other things, that works.
Okay.
What I don't think works is somebody comes in and builds an 800 square foot office and then has 12 Connex boxes that they run the rest of their business out of. Here again, it goes along with taking a little pride in your property and being the kind of neighbor that somebody else, wants to be around.
So Vice Mayor.
But you're gonna have to, I think that's what needs to be done, is there's gotta be some kind of a square foot
Okay.
comparison,
Ratio.
And Vice Mayor, we can do
Yes.
that. And that's certainly something we can quantify, if that's the way we'd like to go. If we would want to say, again, we don't want to burden somebody with building a $100,000 storage building when they can get a Connex box for, I don't know, 15 grand or something. But if they already have an existing permanent building of a sufficient size, we can come up with a ratio that maybe the Connex storage boxes don't exceed more than, let's say, 10 or 20% of the floor ratio of the permanent building. We can come up with whatever you'd like. So you don't end up with the 800 square foot, trailer office and then 10 Connex boxes in the back, and that's it.
I think that's wise.
Hey, you had your turn.
And we're getting there with the UDO subcommittee, just so you know. We're not
We'll go
quite
here
there
first,
yet.
and we'll get back.
Corey knows this as well. I'm sorry, excuse me, Councilmember Mendoza. The general regulations, when we get to that, that's the deep dive on the largest section of our code, and we can get into this type of stuff. Connex boxes would be in there with accessory buildings.
Okay.
I'm not complimenting you, just so you know.
What's that?
I'm not complimenting you.
Okay,
just so
thank you
know.
very much. As far as commercial use, I can see them bringing in temporary if they're doing a remodel, throwing them out front, put all their junk in them, do whatever they gotta do inside, and then go back in. So I think that's a consideration we'd have to think about, unless you guys disagree. Because a lot of businesses, there's no place to put one except for outside the front door if they're gonna do that. The quantity thing you just addressed, I think commercial quantity needs to be way different than residential, or vice versa. You know what I mean?
Okay.
Because I don't think if I have a 12,000 foot home that I should have 5 Connex boxes neither. But I think that ratio, because like if you have a commercial building, it's usually a lot larger than your home.
Right.
So I think that ratio needs to be somehow justified. I agree with the color painting if we can, and I agree that we do probably should have permits to set one.
Okay. So Councilmember Miller, if I may then, we might look at 2 different ratios, residential versus commercial. If you're going to use a Connex box, let's say there's a temporary permit for 30 days. A lot of times these things pop up in the backs of Targets and stuff around Christmas holiday season
Right.
because they have significant amounts of inventory that they wouldn't
Sure.
otherwise have.
You bet.
And so in the same way that happens, you can imagine how that could unfold in a number of ways for any other business, whether it's, Ace Hardware or whomever. So if it's a temporary one, we might not worry so much about the color, but if you're wanting to use it as a long-term storage facility, let's integrate it with the site.
Right. And then
Okay.
the last thing is I would say no to the fence,
No to the fence.
because to me it just brings more attention to the Connex.
It's a fence, like around a fence, right?
I like the theory of the concealment.
Okay.
Basically out of sight, and the temporary permit possibly in an ugly place for seasonal or something, determine in the UDO how long those parameters would be, and we quantify that.
And again, I'll probably talk to Joanne about this. I know she's been hanging out with us all night, so thank you. But we'll probably want to look at, I hate to say something off the cuff like 30 days when oftentimes Christmas season, they'll need a little bit longer than that. There's a variety of ways these are written. We can come up with language that makes sense. One for temporary use and one for as a permanent, don't want to call it a structure, a permanent storage container on the property.
I think we need some kind of control over somebody coming in and building apartments out of storage containers.
They're
I'm not
actually
sure.
pretty heavy.
I'm not sure what that is, but.
This is, this is how they figure out housing in Hong Kong, It's,
Yeah.
they just start stacking boxes up, as high as you can go. But
Yep.
I totally understand that. And to be honest, this kind of lends us into a different discussion that one day, as a council, we may wish to discuss the issue of having some sort of level of design review. So that we have items in the code that say basically don't build metal sheds, as a commercial building. But we don't really have a lot of design criteria. We have some. It has not been enforced very well, I would say, over the last 10 years since the code was adopted, or 12. But we can look at some level of design review without being too overly regulatory, of course. And that would have some discretion if somebody wanted to do a Connex box apartment building.
I would think with our general plan, the way it's written at this point, we could legitimately deny that type of building at this point. Do you agree?
I'm not certain, actually. If they have the zoning for a specific land use, like let's say multifamily, and they figure out how to meet all building codes and regulations,
Could we require
could
that?
figure it out.
A CUP on those type
We
of
certainly,
structures?
we certainly could, Mayor.
Then we'd have some control over them.
We certainly can do that with the UDO rewrite, or we could do it even sooner if we felt it necessary. We don't, the only thing, like I said, we've been kind of waiting for that application is, the Village North. I don't want to talk too out of turn since the property's not on the agenda tonight. But behind the Safeway, they wanted to do park models and the mobile mini Connex storage boxes. So instead of doing the apartments, but they would have to come back through the zoning process and you'd have some discretion at that time.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, well, I mean, when Lon brought up working out of them, then they become a building where you have to have electricity, and then
Yep.
you guys have different rules for that, right?
Well, they have to, well, if they're gonna have an electrical panel and all that stuff, they can't be a mobile container anymore because you don't want someone moving a container with electric hooked up to it. So it'd have to be, installed in place per building codes. I'm not sure if they need a foundation, but they would need. They can basically just convert it into a building. So
Okay.
yes, you can't just. Well, we do have people that unfortunately turn them into offices without asking, but or they buy them from some Joe Schmo and throw them on their property and run on a electrical cord to it, but they're not supposed to do that.
Well, when they go and check their business license sometime over the next year, they will.
Pardon.
Joanne's already on it. We've already caught a couple of them.
When we need to have a requirement for some kind of a building permit, just so we can enforce all this stuff?
Well,
Otherwise, they could just drop it in, right?
The compliance people go around that.
Yeah.
So this is what we have Aaron doing.
Is it written that they are allowed, not allowed, a number? Or is that something that is being,
That's why he's asking for direction.
We're kind of at a crossroads where we've recognized that what we believe is an issue, and the direction from council. Like it's easy for a planner to be
Right.
real onerous, but we don't want to look like we're beating up the development community because we want to encourage development. We don't want to force expenditures on small businesses
Right.
to site-built buildings, but we also want to make sure we don't turn into a town of cargo boxes.
I'd like to add that, behind the primary structure, I would also, interject possibly on either side, considering they open from the narrow side, that it could be placed vertically on either side of the
Oh,
building,
okay.
as well as behind instead of just in front, because then it would be in line, in stream with the building.
So what I'm hearing from you, Councilmember Perkins, if I may, is that you would rather the storage containers not be placed between the primary facility and a public street.
Yes,
You'd like it painted to match the building,
yes,
and you'd like it orientated
no,
perpendicular or,
no,
Or just
no
screen from view?
orientation necessarily,
Okay.
just for the convenience of the business, but in line
okay.
and no fence.
Preferably behind the structure.
I'm hearing no fence. We get a lot of no fences. We're the town of no fences, which I think is great.
Any
Keeps it
other
nice and open.
I think this opens up the conversation to many open areas that we can work on as we're developing to quantify it better.
Well, plus, we do require a permit since they're, of a certain size. Now, at least we have some direction from the council as a policy on when we encourage our applicants and where to place them. I'm not certain about painting the color. We just basically asked for it and got it on the one that I told you about recently. We may need to include that in the UDO rewrite. As a design standard. We already have design standards in there. Like I said, they're kind of blues, to be honest, but we can add that in. Storage, it same goes with accessory buildings, structures, sheds. That oftentimes we would want them to be painted the same color as the primary structure so they don't stand out.
Now, having been working with containers for a lot of years, we've gone ahead and, on the long side, cut doors in them. Now, does that make it now a business, or you have to have that permitted, or do they just do that on their own?
If I may, Councilmember Best, you mean cut doors in them for access to just stick
For
stuff in
access
there,
on
or
the
for
inside.
people to go in there and hang out and put an air conditioning unit in and a desk?
It's usually just for access,
Oh,
but I mean,
I'm not certain that we would. There's doors on the ends of them,
yeah.
They
But
are
we would-
difficult to open.
but they're not a structure though, right? Unless they're converted. Right.
Yeah. No,
Well-
it's not, it's still storage, but it's just so that all right, let's say I go ahead and you were talking about somebody wanting to come in and make a business storage out of them. They make them or they modify them to where they cut them in half, a 40-footer.
Right.
Put a wall in between them.
Like the one that's up there with
And
the
they'll have
20-footer.
two accesses to them
Yeah.
at both ends. And actually, the door that they normally come with is welded up.
I see. I think this is a good conversation. I'm not sure I've gone through all the nuances of how they've been modified. What we've really dealt with the most are the ones where we go out there and then there's a door and then there's a window and then there's an air conditioning unit. We're like, what are you air conditioning in there? And then you realize there's a desk in there. So that's the conversion we worry about. I don't know that we care how many doors or where they're at if they're just being used for storage. What we get concerned about is when people try to get electrical panels hooked up to them and use them as a building when they're not converted
Right.
over. They're not safe. They could be a
No.
fire hazard. People get stuck in there and
I mean, you're 40-foot.
There's a reason why we have building codes.
One door out. It's a long way to get.
absolutely. This is why we have building codes so people don't die.
Me?
You ready?
Am I ready? Oh, no, he's
Yeah.
gonna say.
I just have one more, as I've been listening and we're talking about, we are requiring building permits for them.
If they're
So what is the criteria for that? Because they actually are a mobile piece of equipment. So is it, if you keep it there, like Jack was talking about using them for remodeling or something like that. So do you get you can bring it in for 2 months or 3 months or something while you're doing that? Seasonal, what makes it a permanent structure to require a permit from a mobile box that it starts out to be?
Vice Mayor Turner, I think there's really kind of two items here. One is how do you make a mobile box a structure and what permitting process is there? And then what permitting process do we have just to have a mobile box? And we do require a permit for just the mobile box. If I can, I have Joanne here. I don't know off the top of my head. I don't want to speak too out of turn because this would typically go to Dan Trout or Jim Shinost, as you know, within our building team. But I do know that we do typically require a permit, and Councilmember Mendoza is aware of it because we've required them from him. So,
Yeah, I just wondered where the line was, because I as I've heard it several times about permitting, I'm going, it seemed kind of weird to me.
well, if I may, Vice Mayor, we kind of have a one-size-fits-all concept that it requires a building permit, but it would require a building permit with an extensive amount of plans that would be required to turn it into a structure that someone could operate out of, whether they live in there or they work out of there, so that it's safe for them to work there. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I think my permit was $100. It's not a building permit. It is more of just a use permit. And then when they come out and they make sure that you didn't set your container over the top of your septic tank. They make sure that your container didn't infringe on the 10-foot setback on the property. So,
And that's
I think
correct.
that
It's
$100
technically a building permit,
Yeah.
but it's an application that we use for that purpose, even though you're not building a building. We have been working internally to improve our processes, and I don't want to go too off topic, but we've developed a land use permit process too, which isn't a building permit, but like for small sheds and things like that, just so our building safety team's aware of where they're going, that they're not built right on the property line, that they have proper setbacks. It kind of helps us keep track of what's happening in the community without making somebody go through the building permit process for something that doesn't really require one per code.
If you got a 40-foot container, you open the door at the very end. It's dark at the very end of that. And most people I know put lights in them. And then they plugged them in. And now we're back at what kind of building do we have? Permanent? What do I need?
That's a very good question, and you're absolutely correct. They are dark because they're long, cavernous cargo containers. And people, when they want to store stuff in there, they want to see where they put the stuff. We kind of have a battle with that all the time when people want to put electrical panels on them. We're like, this is a mobile container. We're not going to let you hook up power sources to things that could be moved in an instant. I believe we have a process, and if Dan, I can actually get back to you for a future study session or something with some more information from our building team. I don't want to get too far in the weeds and talk out of turn. My whole hope here was to understand how do we just deal with them from the 20,000 foot level. I can certainly get us more information on the building permit level.
Well, no, I just know that people use them for shops and
all the time.
what have you, and you can lock it up, it's secure. But
Mayor and Councilmember Best, they asked us if they could use that one down on the 89 for a shop I think it was for spray painting or welding or something, and we said, you can't just go in there with all this equipment and start using it as a shop without converting it into a building. You can kill yourself or somebody else. It has to be properly done. So we do watch out for that. I'm not certain that we have our thumb on the pulse of every cargo container that's being used in this town right now, but with our second compliance officer from, that you guys gave us, it's really been a big help. We're starting, actually, if you just drive down the 89, it looks nicer. I don't know if you've noticed, but we've gotten a lot of stuff cleaned up.
What I was gonna say is those containers, when you order them, they can be ordered with man doors or roller doors, and the end sealed when you order it or get it from the container. We used to use them as evidence lockers in California.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Dun, dun, dun.
I'll make a
Famous
mo-
last words.
I'll make a motion, we adjourn.
No.
Second.
All in favor, say
Okay.
aye.
She wanted to say something.
Uh-oh, what did you want to say?
Miss Cecilia.
Why, you've been quiet all night?
No, I have not.
Oh, okay.
My tongue's sore from biting.
Go ahead.
What do you want from staff? Do you want us to come back here in a couple
Yes,
months with
come
some
back.
suggestions? Okay.
Please.
Because I think, Councilmember Best, I think your comment about a 40-foot container, you're gonna wanna have some lights at one end. I think we need to think about that, because I've also heard about people running their, extension cords just to make
Right.
sure they can see what's in there. So but do you feel like you've gotten some guidance you can at least?
Absolutely.
Because you mentioned maybe doing this in the UDO rewrite. I think this is probably needs to happen a little sooner, this
Well,
part, and.
For clarification.
Certainly,
if you
it's
come
town
back to
manager.
us with some-
We
Right,
can come back to
with
you.
some.
And I may bring the building official, just if
Yeah.
we want to kind of talk about the nuances of permitting, or even Joanna and I can handle it. I think this has been very helpful, just because we haven't had any policy or guidance on this issue, and we have a lot of cargo containers, so this has been very helpful. And we can do policies in place of the actual code amendments in the meantime, if we need to.
We might be able to make a little extra revenue. We have our building inspectors, carry their bag and say, well, you can't put lights in there, but we are selling headlamps.
Well, should we stock a supply up there at the front counter with some lights
Yeah, there you go.
and headlamps?
Anybody else?
Thank you.
Jamie's got her-
Jamie?
I just have to tell you guys, when I first came to the town, and for years, when I first came to the town, we actually used the Connex box as our record storage
Uh-huh.
area.
Sure
Do
Yeah,
you
we
remember
did,
that?
Yep, I
Right
do.
behind Town Hall?
We'll need
Until
to
it
make,
started leaking, then it was a problem.
We're done?
Thank you, Jason, for
Already
being here.
adjourned.
I hope you feel
Thanks.
better.
Okay.
Nobody said yes.
Oh, second? Aye.
Second and voted,
Bye.
buddy. Voted, did.
You can go.